Well, hey everyone! Welcome to episode 343 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week, I hosted another fantastic Australian photographer specializing in aerial work, Chris Saunders. Chris comes highly recommended by his peers from Down Under and has an incredible portfolio of images to go along with those recommendations. I had such a blast speaking to him, and I think you will enjoy our chat. If you're new to this podcast, you'll quickly learn that we are completely listener supported on Patreon. I depend on our listeners to keep the show going. I purposely do not accept advertisements on the show because I only want to be accountable to you, the listener. If you find value in what we are doing here, please do take a moment to support us on Patreon. I understand that everyone's budget and situation is different, but if you're getting any value out of listening to the show, I think anything more than $0 is fair. If you can't support us on Patreon, you can always help us out by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Also, I've begun launching discussion threads on Patreon that you can participate in whether or not you support the show, so check those out. Thanks in advance. All right, let's get to this week's episode with Chris Saunders. All right, Chris Saunders, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to finally talk to you in person.
I feel like every single Australian photographer that's been on the podcast has said, you got to get Chris Saunders because he is super fun and interesting.
I'm not sure you got the right Chris Saunders. But no, look, I guess, yeah, I think as you've mentioned before, we've got quite a close, it's not a big community of photographers in Australia, and we do hang out a fair bit together and listen to the podcast in the car, and certainly you've been you and your guests have been keeping me company for the last month, traveling around New Zealand, and giving me some good food for thought. So pleased to be part of it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm a big fan of your photography as well. I feel like there must be something in the water out there in Western Australia because you guys are producing some incredible photography.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world to live, and we're definitely lucky to have some incredible scenery in the state. Having said that, it's still you can still fly a few thousand kilometers to have to get to it. It's one state, but it's a big place, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny. Every time someone talks about Australia, I'm reminded of like in school, they would always, you take like a map of the world, and then because of the weird way the globe works, everything is not the right proportions. But if you actually take Australia and you put it on top of other countries, it's freaking massive.
It is, yeah. It's pretty. It's a very big place, yeah.
Right, but there's not a lot of people.
There's not a lot of people, and there's a lot of space between people, which from a landscape perspective can make it a really rewarding place to tour and visit.
Yeah,
I guess given the events of the last few years, that's allowed us to tour locally and stay locally and enjoy and experience some of those sites and landscapes.
I feel like you're the first Australian photographer that has framed COVID in such a positive way.
Genuinely, I did find it because I'm originally from the UK, and so spend a lot of time traveling back to the UK to see friends and family, and I guess not being able to do that freed us up to do other things, and I certainly felt that I got my value out of WA over the last few years. It's been brilliant to be able to stay here and see that.
Right. Well, Chris, for people that aren't familiar with you, don't know anything about your photography, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and who Chris Saunders is?
Yeah, so I'm currently living in Perth, Western Australia. I've been here for about 15, 16 years now. Originally from just outside London in the UK, and went to university in Southampton studying engineering, and then and still do work full-time as an engineer, and that brought me a few years ago out to Perth, Western Australia, with my wife, and then we had a daughter out here. She's now 11, and growing up here, enjoying everything that WA has to offer. Kids, and it's a great place for them to grow up. And yeah, that's pretty much us. So Lorna, Caitlin, myself, and our dog Izzy. That's us as a unit.
How did you get into photography as an engineer?
Ah, that's a good question. So I guess I first got into photography when I was at school back in the sixth form. So when I was sort of 16, 17, 18, we had a dark room at my school, and used to spend my lunchtimes in there processing images, and I wasn't very good at it, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I guess as a result, when I left school, I pretty much stopped anything to do with photography other than just the usual film happy snaps. I don't think they didn't have iPhones with cameras and things back then, so everything was on film, which in some ways is probably good because it means there's less photographic records of some of the other things we got up to at university and things like that. I'd hate to be a kid growing up now and all that technology around recording everything.
Wow.
But yeah, I basically then put the camera down, and I've visited some pretty amazing places, and one of my big regrets is that I didn't continue with photography for that period, because now I'm having to revisit all those locations, or be left with regret that we never, I never took that opportunity. But then I guess I got back in through to photography when my daughter was born, and for me it was an opportunity to try and document her growing up and so on. And I rediscovered a love for it, and quite enjoyed that aspect. And then I just started taking pictures of landscapes as a bit of an escape from I guess the pressures and the stresses of engineering, and something for the soul rather than for the head. So yeah, that's how I sort of got back into it.
Okay, and then what kind of engineering are you doing?
That's a good question as well. So it's a bit of a specialist discipline. I'm a subsea engineer. So what that means is I look after assets, which an infrastructure that lives and operates on the seabed, and my job is to make sure that it stays fit for purpose, and doesn't harm the environment, and keeps operating, and so on. So that's in the oil and gas industry. I guess that's becoming quite a challenging environment to work in, politically and environmentally. But I feel that the part that I work in, that's definitely contributing to keeping that operating safe, and doing what we can to keep the lights on in people's homes, sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you had any internal cognitive dissonance working in oil and gas, but it seems to me like the answer would be pretty simple, because your job is to make sure there's no leaks, which I think is a pretty important job.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's not in, I suppose it's probably off topic a bit, but it's not in anyone's interest, whether it's an oil and gas operator or the public or the environment, for those things to happen. So everyone strives to stop that happening. And then I guess as a society, we've learned and are learning that there are better ways that we can manage the environment going forward in terms of carbon emissions and so on. And that's a journey that the planet is as a whole is on. Arguably, perhaps we should have started a lot earlier down that pathway, but until then, there's still a dependency on these products, and we all need them to currently fuel our cars, and etc.
Yeah. Well, earlier you said that you got into the photography side of things to kind of feed your heart and your soul, because the engineering is feeding your brain. But I'm guessing that engineering, at least to some degree, informs your approach to photography. And I'm curious if you could maybe articulate some ways in which your engineering background has influenced your approach to making images.
I guess the main one is I couldn't do without either of these things. If someone said, do you want to follow photography full time and give up engineering? I think the answer would be no. I need that mental stimulation and challenge that comes with that part of my life. And equally, I find myself getting pretty low and down and lacking energy if I don't spend the time in the photography space as well. And they probably consume about an equal amount of time in my week, so 40 hours plus a week in terms of the engineering. And I would say in a normal week I would do about the same in the photography space as well. So not certainly it's not full time, but it's a significant part of what I do. I suppose that there's, from a visual perspective, keeping things simple is one thing I get from engineering. Not over engineering, not over complicating an image, and I find a beauty in simplicity and sort of a minimalist style. I find a lot of enjoyment in lines and geometry. I tend to also look for, and the only real way I can sort of describe it is a balance in the image, and I sort of see areas of heaviness and weight, and a sort of central pivot point, and sort of visualize the image in terms of whether it's loaded in a particular corner or not. So I don't really know how to describe that any better, other than I sort of see the image almost as a mass, and look at how that sort of is balanced overall. I guess the other thing is I've not really had any formal training in photography or arts or anything like that, and as a result, I don't really know what the rules are. And to some extent, I guess that means I'm not encumbered by that, and I can just do what feels right to me. And quite often, I'll then find out. Someone will say, "Oh, your images have this associated with them," and it's just it's not a learned thing. It's just what felt right. So that's one other area. And look, I think planning is a big thing for me, and I guess we'll talk a bit more about that as we move on. Attention to detail is something that's critical in engineering, and I think you would see that in a lot of my prints. That they're very. I like to think they're quite refined, and I've scanned the edges, all those sorts of things, cross the I's, dotted the T's. I think those are the main things. I'm probably more of a proactive than reactive photographer, so I tend to have things that I'm looking at. I'm looking in advance for things rather than reacting at things that are coming to me. The main exception to that would be aerial photography, bizarrely, but for landscape, on the ground photography, that to me is very proactive, and the aerial stuff is probably the exception that's reactive.
That's fascinating because really good friend of mine that I do a lot of my photography with, Kane, we do a lot of aerial photography together with drones, but primarily he finds his subjects almost always ahead of time, like on Google Earth. He'll find areas and he'll be like, okay, this looks really promising, and then we'll scout it with our drones, and so it's interesting that you say that the aerial photography is more reactive, because I found in my own aerial photography, I'm the same way. Like, I don't, like, it's fun to go with him because he's like, this area is very target rich because I've scouted it on Google Earth. And I'm like, great, I will fly over there and see what I find,
Yeah. And look, that's pretty much my approach as well, Matt. So there's a lot of planning that goes up before I go and do an aerial trip. But then, inevitably what you find on the day is very different to what you expect to see, or you find stuff on the way that is more interesting, and you divert and you go off and you explore that sort of thing. So it's definitely for me a very reactive part of photography, aerial photography, especially when you're doing it, I think, from an aircraft rather than a drone, especially when you've got such a big area that you can play in. Then you really do find that reactiveness takes over.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to go back a little bit to where you were talking about visual weight, because I think that's an area that photographers could probably spend much more time thinking about, or at least being cognitive of visual weight in their images. And I'm glad you brought it up as something that you're kind of intuitively just good at, because I think that gives you a very strong advantage, because feel like for a lot of photographers that's not something that they do well at all. In fact, that's one of the biggest critiques I have of other people's images when they ask me for critique, where I'm like, this part of the image takes up, you know, 40% of your photograph and there's nothing interesting in it, you know? So like,
Yeah.
what's going on there, you know? Or like 2/3 of your image is taken up over here on the left-hand side of this object, and then there's nothing on the right-hand side to counterbalance that at all. So it's like, you got to think about that stuff.
You do. It's even things like, if you think of, say, just a lever or even a seesaw, something like that, the more you move an element to the edge of the seesaw or something like that, then it has a bigger impact on the image. And that's the same with distractions in images as well, where you have, elements on the edge or close to the edge. They can have a disproportionate impact on the balance of an image, sort of thing. So. Yeah, and there's all sorts of ways that can be affected, whether it's through, saturation, whether it's through, contrast or texture or whatever it is. But yeah, there's a number of different things that contribute to that weight. But generally speaking, knowing where your centers of mass are in an image sort of helps you. It's a very geeky conversation, but yeah, it helps you understand where your viewer's eyes are going to be pulled to, basically, a bit like gravity.
Well, it might be geeky, but I think it's probably one of the most overlooked aspects of composition, personally. Well, I love that you talked about the engineering side of things. I always like to ask this question of people on the show that are engineers, because I don't know the answer and it's always a different answer. Is there any part of photography or what you've gained through photography that you've been able to apply to your engineering background?
Oh, that's a good question. And I'm not sure I can't think of anything obvious that's jumping out at me other than I, just a greater, I think a greater appreciation for design in things, and whether that's, whether it's Mother Nature or whatever in terms of design, or something on a piece of paper that you're looking at, just being able to stand back and see that overall, rather than the detail, having that sort of helicopter view and being able to appreciate something for its simplicity and function or whatever, I think is something I've got better at since my photography. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. No, that's awesome. See, that's the kind of answer I was hoping you'd give me. Awesome. I think I'm gonna guess this is a little bit from your engineering background, but I'm curious, why do you think that the mundane aspects of photography are fun, and what does focusing on them allow you to do as a photographer?
Yeah, okay. I can appreciate this might be a bit of a hard sell, but I'll go for it and see whether I can drag anyone along with me on it. So I guess in the first instance, it feels to me, the analogy for me here is a bit like a child at Christmas. So of course, Christmas Day is this amazing day that that kids wake up excited for, but there's that whole build up to Christmas Day that kids get excited about as well. And it's, I'm sure you did it as a kid. You were looking through catalogs in terms of presents and things like that you might hope to get, and that sort of thing. And it's not just you wake up on Christmas Day, Christmas happens and it's over. There's a thing around it. And so, this build up in terms of, some of the planning around photography turns what might otherwise be a 1 hour, 1 day, or say, if you're really lucky, a 1 week, sort of event or trip into something that, that you can enjoy and anticipate over a few months. So, there is definitely that anticipation and excitement build up that happens when you do some of this stuff. I guess the other thing, and predominantly here, I think we're talking about planning, to be honest, and it allows me to forget about some of the hygienic things associated with a trip, some of the logistics, and and that then allows me to think more creatively and frees me up to think about the creative decisions that I want to make. Yeah, there's some good value in it from that point of view, from my point of view, and having a good plan as well also gives you contingencies. Hopefully, you don't just have plan A. Hopefully you've got a plan A, plan B, and a plan C in case you need it, and maybe even an idea for a plan D. But it essentially means when things don't go to plan, you've got something that you can jump onto, and that you're not left in a location thinking, well, this isn't what I expected to find. What do I do now? And you lose the opportunity, and you sort of get a bit stressed, and focusing on, okay, well, I wasn't expecting this, therefore I have to do that. And I've heard other photographers talk about, plans can limit people, and I think they can. If you just have a rigid plan, then yes, for sure, that could be very, very confining, and you don't think outside the box and look elsewhere. But a good plan is for me about maximizing opportunity, and allowing you to try and tease every bit of value out of the moment you're in, sort of thing. I'm sure it's basic in what every photographer does in some ways. You're not gonna turn up for a beach to shoot a sunrise shot only to find that the tide was out, that there's no water there, that you turned up at midnight rather than 6 a.m. Everyone to some extent is planning this stuff. It's just the degree to which you go to, sort of thing. You're going to look at the weather, those sorts of things. So there's planning and there's planning, but I just find that the whole thing is part of a very exciting process and gets me. It doesn't. I think your story earlier about your friend who's identifying target-rich areas. He's getting excited about that. He's. But not only that, I guess the trick is that there is, like you say, not just to. So he's done the hard work for you. He's basically said, "There's a target-rich area, and then you can go explore." And that's essentially he's done your planning and pre-work for you, to rather than you putting the drone up and going, "Oh, there's nothing here. What do I do now?" I've got half a day with nothing to shoot, sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's funny because some of that I think is personality driven as well. Because and some of it for me is like I used to be that guy. I used to be like, I would have, like if I did a 7-day trip in fall, I would know exactly where I was going to be on what days. And now I have like a more flexible idea where it's like I have a list of ideas or places or subjects, and then I can kind of pick and choose based on the weather or whatever. And so I think there's a balance to be struck there, but I do think that there's a lot to be said for coming up with lots of ideas, lots of plans, and then having the temperament and the skill set to be able to pivot or adjust if you need to.
Yeah, I think that's probably that's well summarized, Matt. That's definitely the way I tend to approach it. I've just spent a month touring the South Island of New Zealand, and I had areas that I was planned to be in for particular days, and as a rule, they're quite hard to change. But I did do that a couple of times due to some significant weather. But generally speaking, when you're in an area, you say, okay, I'm going to be in this space for 4 or 5 days. Here's a list of various different things that I'm going to go do while I'm there. And you might even go to say, to the extent of saying, okay, well, these ones I want to be in this area for sunrise or sunset, and therefore they need to be done in a morning or an afternoon. But then on a given day, you're sort of waking up, or the night before, you're planning that morning and saying, okay, well, for the conditions today, what's today's plan, basically?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good approach for sure, and I can appreciate getting excited about the planning aspect of photography. I just for me, it's not the fun part for me. But
I don't think you're alone. I think I'm probably more on the end of the spectrum on that one.
No, but it's good because like my friend Kane, he loves to plan ahead. Like I went to Spain back in May, and neither him or I knew anything about northern Spain. But I knew if I invited him, which I wanted him to come with me no matter what, but I knew by inviting him, he would get super excited about finding all these little niche spots for us to go explore and photograph. And I knew that I didn't really have to do a ton of planning. I mean, there were spots that I wanted to go to as well, but man, he had three times as many places for us to go photograph than we had time to do. So it was
Hmm.
perfect.
That just means you've got 3 more trips to go back there.
Oh, for sure, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny you brought up the tide because, and I laughed when you said that because we're both from Colorado, so like we don't deal with tide much, right? You know, so
Hmm.
but so we had like we knew okay, this is a sunset or sunrise shot, but we had completely disregarded like the dramatic changes that can happen at tide. Like we knew about tide charts and all that, but like holy smokes, some of those scenes like you have to have high tide or it's like a completely different landscape, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was a good lesson.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
there's some of that with just basic stuff with aerial photography as well. That you obviously don't want to be shooting into the sun over water because of glare. You know, you lose all the color and things like that. So, yeah, just planning the time of day that you're going to shoot and being conscious that it can have an impact. You know, is really important. And most people would have been on a workshop somewhere, but probably and they turn up at a location with a big group. The workshop leader puts them in the right position at the right time to get that shot. And that's because those guys have done that planning. And probably what isn't visible to everyone is the fact that they've got two or three other locations lined up as backups in case that one can't work on that day or whatever as well. So, I think, whether people are running workshops or attending them, planning sort of a hidden thing there that really gets lets people get value out of their time. And that's probably the biggest thing for me. My time is probably the most valuable thing that I have, and
Yes.
planning for me is about maximizing that the value that I get out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of planning, let's talk a little bit about projects. I'd be curious for you to talk a little bit about your approach to planning photography projects.
I have a concept I use, which is sort of starting with the end in mind, and that really starts with defining what the objective is and the concept, and then going on from there. But more than that, I suppose there's I don't know if you've come across him, but there's a motivational speaker on TED that I came across a few years ago called Simon Sinek, and
Yeah, it's great. Start
his
start start with the why, right?
start with the why. Exactly. So if you don't know why you're going to do something, then things unravel pretty quickly from there, and you can find your work without direction or intent. So really, for me, that it does start with the why. Why am I doing this? And then what do I want to achieve out of it, and how am I? And then you can get into the how am I going to go through that. Now, I'm not going to expand on that anymore, and just say, YouTube Simon Sinek and watch his talks on this. This is his space. But that whole concept is probably a bit of a philosophy I tend to apply to the planning. And then the other thing, which is probably from my engineering background, is something called it's called front end loading, which is really dry and boring. But basically, the premise is that the more effort you put in up front on something, the higher the rewards down the track, and you minimize the likelihood for mistakes and so on. So for me, it just spending that time planning maximizes the quality of what you're likely to produce at the end. So really the process for me is go through, obtain an idea, research that, come up with a concept around that and select that concept. Then you sort of go through into a phase of planning to execute that plan in the field. You would then there's a period of post production when you get back and the editing, and then you turn that into again in engineering terms, sort of you're fabricating, manufacturing, producing something. Whether that's an exhibition, whether it's a book, whether it's a print, whether it's whether it's a talk, whatever it is, but there's a deliverable effectively at the end of that process. And so, I tend to approach something with understanding why I'm going out to do it, and then I build those. I basically have those stage gates and make those decisions as I go along.
Yeah, maybe you could give us an example of an actual project that you've worked on or that you're currently working on, and tell us like what was your why? Like I would love to hear you articulate kind of the connection between the work and the why.
Yeah, I I guess sometimes that's more of a. I actually I'm not very good at articulating some of that stuff. I had another photographer, Chris Dark, who I shoot with a fair bit. He's very good at when we shoot together, helping define that process. So if we're doing projects, I tend to look at Chris to come up with that overarching message that might pull something together. But I guess one project we did was we went out to salt flats and just shot for 3 or 4 days. We didn't really move. We basically spent the time within, say, a kilometer of where we were camping out there, and you literally just watch the light change throughout the day. So the scenery changed, but the location didn't. And I guess the why there was just about trying to document and record light changing in the environment, and some of these sort of surreal scenes that you can encounter out there, and how they look at different times of day. So then when you've got that idea as a concept, and look, I think it would be neglect of me not to reference Murray Frederick's work in that
Yes.
in that space. So I guess we definitely weren't going out to copy what he was doing, but there was an element of seeing it and going, wow, that's a pretty interesting landscape. It'd be really good to go and spend time out there. And we certainly didn't go to the extremes that he does of, I think he really throws himself into the environment and so on. And this was nothing along those.
And yeah, I remember I saw the film he put out, which was really awesome. He's got the large format camera and he's got a bicycle and he's riding out into the mud with his camera and his tripod, and then he's producing these really interesting long exposures on film. I can't remember the name of that film, but it's really fascinating. I'll find it and put it in the show notes. But his work is really cool.
It is. So definitely not on to the same extreme as where he took that work. But for the most part, we just enjoyed spending 3 or 4 days really in a very confined space, but both pointing our cameras pretty much in opposite directions, photographing light, for want of a better word, rather than detail. So we had a lot of the images were taken with Vaseline spread over filters, so that all the detail was taken away. It was quite a interesting, cathartic sort of process to go through. And by so that was the why. The what we were going to do was basically present that in an exhibition format. So again, we knew what the target was there, and we knew that exhibition format would be, say, 15 to 20 large prints, 44-inch size prints. So we're not thinking volume of work, we're thinking quality and large piece exhibition. And then that just drives how you go, how you position yourself best to go do that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you guys set out, you had this very specific why for this project. I'm really curious to hear if, while you were going through the process of creating the work, or maybe after you were done creating the work, if there was anything that you learned either about yourselves or the landscape or the experience that maybe was unexpected, that kind of helped maybe transform the why into something more than what you originally set out to do? Or is there anything there?
I would say that as a whole, we definitely both grew photographically from that, and I think if you're going to do any sort of collaboration with another photographer, you're always going to be giving up something as part of that process. You're going to have to compromise part of your workflow, but I guess in return, what you hope for is that as a collective, that the 1+1 = 3 type thing happens, sort of thing. And I suppose the way you can do that is that you can learn off of each other. So on day one, we both turned up, at these salt flats, and we pretty much got out the car and we walked in separate directions, and then we might have spent 5-6 hours out there, and we got back together. We talked what we've been doing during the day. We shared images of where we were at with stuff, and you share ideas and concepts around that. And slowly the style of the photography changed over the next few days and sort of merged, if that makes sense. Now, when we went out on day 4, we were still getting out the car and walking in separate directions, but we had sort of, the style of the photography was getting quite close to each other, which is something, again, if you're going to have an exhibition, you almost need to decide whether you're going to have a consistent style to your images, or whether you want to clearly say, this is person's A style, this is person B, and they're very distinct, and that there's no ambiguity, I guess, or sort of lack of direction in what you're trying to present. We definitely grew, and certainly the project evolved. And I don't think that at the start of the project was necessarily what we ended up with was what we wholly envisaged, but it was 70% of what we started with, and the rest we learned along the way.
I love that. And you had mentioned to me before we recorded that you're an introvert, which I don't think is a surprise. Most nature and landscape photographers are introverted, except for a few of us. But I'm curious, how do you feel about working on photography projects with other creative folks as an introvert?
Yeah, look, I suppose it can be a challenge. And like you say, for me, photography is a very sort of personal and solitary experience. It's one of the reasons I got into landscape photography is that I think as a photographer, your job is basically to sit with the subject, to have a conversation with that subject, and to get to understand its character, and then find a way of transcribing that and presenting that in an image, and whether that's of a person or whether it's of a landscape, I sort of feel the objective is still the same there. And as an introvert, I struggle to do that with people. I really don't. For me to lead that conversation is quite draining on me. Doesn't mean that I can't do it. Most introverts are more than happy to have conversations and things like that. But it just isn't something that I enjoy. So I guess as a result, going out into a landscape is about just sitting and listening. And the landscape talks to you, and it basically reveals things to you, and your job is to be there at the right time to understand that and document it. So that is the introvert piece for me, and in order to do that, I require time and space to do that. I can't just turn up somewhere and get the shot and move on, and basically run and gun 20 or 30 locations in a day. I need time to develop that relationship with what I'm shooting, and sit and appreciate it and try and capture it. Now, like you say, thankfully a lot of landscape photographers and nature photographers are very similar, and so as a result, everyone's trying to do the same thing. But there are degrees on the spectrum as to how to that, and some people might be able to achieve that goal within 5 minutes. Some people might need 5 hours to get that experience and capture it. So I suppose if you're working in a group, it's really it can be stressful, but it's also it can be transformative. And collaborating with other people is a bit like any relationship. It's about finding the right partners to do it with, and the right people. And if the the upsides and the downsides don't balance or better, then it's probably not the arrangement for you. And try talking to someone else and shooting with someone else. Like any relationship, just be honest with whoever you're shooting with and have those conversations. Talk about what you're enjoying from shooting together with each other, what you're not enjoying, and see how the other parties are feeling, and try and work out what the solutions are to those problems. And that's definitely I think the strategy you have to apply to those sorts of things. Otherwise, it would just be a frustrating opportunity for you. You have to accept you're going to give something up, but you need to look and try and leverage the opportunities that those relationships are going to give you as well, sort of thing.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciate about the photography culture in Australia and New Zealand is it seems like there's much more collaboration in terms of working together on projects, or building each other up and things like that. Whereas I look around here in the United States and I just don't see that happening as often, or almost never. Like, I'm trying to think of an example of I can think of maybe three or four total, but it seems like in Australia there's all kinds of these little partnerships that happen where people are propping each other up and building these little projects and things like that. And I'm curious, why do you think that is?
Maybe it's something in the water. I don't know. I mean, is your perception, perhaps if I ask you a question around that, is it because you think there's a perception that you're competitors or something in your community, that you are competing with other photographers? Is that is that perhaps one thing that might be?
I'm sure that's a piece of it for us in the United States, for sure, in terms of how people make their living in photography here. It's very workshop heavy, or print sales, and there's a lot of territorialism that can kind of come into play there. So I'm wondering if that's a big piece of it. But I feel like every project I've been a part of, like the collaboration piece is what makes it successful. It's like there's tons of things I've been a part of that there's no way I could have done on my own, but having three or four partners help makes it doable. So I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah. I guess I suppose there is an element with, certainly with landscape photography, you don't, it's not something you need to do, it's something you can go as a solo and do. You don't typically need the support of others to go do it. I think one of the main value things I get out of working with other photographers and doing projects with them is you tend to go a bit further, take an extra risk than you would do if you were just on your own. So whether that's driving down a road and you keep going for an extra few kilometers or miles before you turn back because things are looking like you might get bogged or stuck out there or something, or whether it's walking that bit further into a wilderness or whatever. So I do think there's or whether you visit a different part of the world with another photographer, to basically push where you might not be comfortable going on your own, but there's a safety in numbers aspect. So I think there are certainly things that you can unlock from working together. And even if you think of it as a competitive relationship, I suppose having competition isn't necessarily a bad thing. Competition strives you to do better in what you do, and I guess, but that doesn't mean that you can't collaborate either, and work together on things. And I do think there's definitely a feeling of nurturing in whether it's WA. I don't think it's unique to WA. I think Australia in general has this sort of nurturing in the photographic community. I don't know whether that applies to some of the more commercial or say wedding photography sort of spaces, but certainly in terms of what you might call art photography, then yes, there is a there is a collaboration, and perhaps that's from the fact that are we really competing? At the end of the day, someone isn't gonna someone either likes your print or your work or they don't, and they will buy it. They will buy it because they like it. It's unlikely that they will that they'll buy someone else's. That if they like it, they would get it anyway. There's plenty of things that they can sort of look at out there, and I suppose in terms of workshops and things like that, again, the workshops that you run and and other people run will have very different feels, and they're not really they are the people sign up to workshops for who's running them, not what you're going to do or things like that. And that comes down to personality and relationships and those sorts of things. So I'm not convinced that the competition aspect is something to be worried about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about printing.
Brilliant.
I know it's something you're quite passionate about. You've got those beautiful prints behind you. You've got that giant, what is that, a Canon, what is that, is that the 51 or the 21? It's huge.
41.
The 41, yeah, that's a bad boy right there. I know a lot of photographers these days, for whatever reason, it seems like they don't care about printing. So I'm curious how having the print as your end goal changes your approach in the field or your approach to photography.
I guess there's a few things there. I'd probably rewind a step actually, first of all, and say why I print, and because I think for me, leaving an image on a screen, it feels a bit incomplete, and isn't doesn't conclude the work. So there's something which is definitely,
it's like building a car but not putting the engine in it.
Yeah, exactly. There's some, well, not building a car and then not taking it for a drive, I guess.
Right.
But there's something emotive about finishing an image and committing it to print. It makes something more permanent, and I guess we're all getting more used to that swipe culture of seeing things on phones where you just flick through images and you don't dwell on them. When someone hands a print to you, you're almost forcing them to to enjoy that, and there's less, it's less temporary, less transitory, and they can start to appreciate it, and for me, a print has soul. I don't quite know how to explain that, but there's a soul in a print, and I feel sort of a screen image just doesn't have that. So that's why I do it, I guess. And then I guess in terms of how that influences what I do, I suppose, to go from the screen to a print, that a screen can hide all sorts of deficiencies in an image, especially if you're looking on Instagram or Facebook, they're compressed or whatever, they're small size images. What are they? 3,000 pixels at best, in terms of on a long edge. You're taking a big image, you're compressing it down. You can hide all sorts of things behind that. I think when your end goal is to create prints, and in particular large format prints, there is nowhere to hide. You put a print under a gallery light or even a competition grade light, it exposes everything in there. Things that you can't see on the screen, unless you're really looking for them, just become these glaring flaws in an image. So for me, there is that's one of the ways it changes my approach in the field. I'm not looking, but it's most obvious, I'm not looking to crop anything. If you're cropping an image, you're already losing resolution. We spend a lot of money buying megapixels and really sharp lenses and things like that, and then only to crop them down seems a bit of a travesty to me. So I get annoyed with myself if I come back and have to crop an image because I can't, and sometimes you can't. I generally use prime lenses, So there's always an element of it, but
Right.
yeah, that's one thing I do. The other thing I'm doing is, I guess this comes with the why, what, how discussion, but the why. I'm thinking when I'm taking the image, why am I taking this image? How is it making me feel? And therefore, what paper and things do I need that are going to support that and amplify that message and emotion, and help elevate it. So I think for me it does it adds that extra layer onto when you take something off the screen and put it on paper. The paper that you choose has its own character and things like that, and they were all things that are going through. It's quite common. I'll be sat in the scene taking an image, going, "Oh, this is going to look beautiful on a nice light textured matte paper or something like that." It's already I can already sort of feel how it's gonna play out.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I feel like most people don't do that.
Yeah. And look, I really, as you're probably getting, I really enjoy printing. And I've said to a few people, I think actually photography is just is a means to an end for me to support my printing habit. So that tends to be how I think about it, and I enjoy the post production and the thinking that goes into getting an image ready for print. Which in itself is quite a skill set, and I think has improved my photography as a result.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I'm sure you have much more attention to detail than if you weren't printing. You're gonna start noticing things when you're editing your images that you probably wouldn't have normally even paid attention to. I'm sure you're much more meticulous about looking at the edges for distractions. You're looking for little things in the scene that might look like a small distraction on your phone or whatever, but when you print that thing, it's like, oh my God, how did I miss that? So I think printing, it just elevates your photography to the next level.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. The main reason I do so much printing as well is, as you're looking behind me, those images are they're hanging on a wire. I think I call it my washing line, but I basically print an image out and it will hang up there for weeks, and I'll have a pencil and I'll mark up on it things that I like, things that I don't like, and I'll live with that for a bit, and it'll allow me to better understand the things that I like and don't like about it, and I can go back and re-edit and reprint it, do the same again, and eventually I'll get to a point where I'm stopping finding things in it, and that's when it's done, and it will get a final print and filed away, and that's my process, I guess.
I would argue too that kind of longer process of looking at your prints and refining them, it probably over time helps you refine the types of images that you are looking for when you're out in the field as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it helps you understand the difference between wow factor and longevity of an image. So,
Yes.
I think we all fall into a trap of loving our last image the most. The last image that you edited is typically, you tend to think a lot more of it, when you've just finished it. I think what I've tend to find is when you print stuff out, some of those images you keep coming back to, and some of them you tire of quite quickly. And I think when you're selling art for people to put up in their homes that they're going to walk past every day, having you spending time with it and understanding that is quite important, and certainly helps me, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So if people are new to printing and they don't have a rich uncle who can, fund their lavish printing habits, or they don't have a large budget or whatever, what are some ways that people can get going without, putting a second mortgage on their house?
That's okay. I
And
again,
maybe you're not the
you
right
know,
person to ask because you've got
well,
that massive Canon 4100 behind you.
well, I'm not. So I guess I'm not sure there's an answer to that conundrum. But what I would, so perhaps one way of thinking this is, another great YouTuber, a guy called Thomas Heaton, did a talk on this a few years ago, and he talked about printing as being a heart decision, not a head decision. As in, this is for him. It's not the most. Your accountant would hate it. It's not something that you
Yes,
that you
and
do.
your spouse.
Yes, exactly. That's another anecdote actually, for which remind me to come back to. But I think there's no disguising that printing is an expensive pastime. And you can't get over that there is a production cost per image. But what you have to be doing is getting development or quality value out of that process to offset that cost. And if that's not happening for you, then it's not the right pathway for you, I guess. For me, editing and printing go hand in hand, and if I can't print, then I tend not to edit because it's sort of ingrained into my workflow. But you ask a question, so I'll try and give you a few options here. So I guess find a friend. Chances are you've got a friend who's got a printer, and they're probably underusing it. And the most expensive thing you can do with a printer is not use it, because they burn ink cleaning lines and heads and things like that when they're underused.
Yeah.
So find a friend and see if you can pay them to do your prints for you. That's a
I love that.
really good way of doing it. I guess sort of related to that is find a friend to buy a printer with. If you buy something small, you could do a bit of a timeshare with it, and 1 month with you, 1 month with them, or something like that. It's perhaps a smaller investment that way, if you go down that route. I guess the other thing that I'd be remiss not to say is strike up a relationship with a local printer. There are expert master printers in most parts of the world these days. They have a huge amount of experience and can give you feedback in terms of the quality of your printing, and what you need to do to improve that work. And I guess if you keep going back to the same printer, you can develop that relationship. Hopefully over time you can negotiate some preferential rates with them if you're putting the volume work through them. And you can get consistency of results and all those sorts of things. So that's one thing I would say, that you basically pay per use almost that way. I mean, obviously you can go online and you can and you probably get better. You get a lower cost. I wouldn't say better value, but you get a lower cost online. And I think, whilst improving, the quality is likely to be lower as well when you go to these mass online print houses. A couple of other options, buy secondhand. Buy a secondhand printer. Make sure it's working before you do it. But that's people quite often, like you say, they get disenfranchised with the printing. Realize they've not used their printer for a year, and that they're not getting value out of it, and they will sell them. So look on Gumtree or eBay or whatever and see if you can pick up a second-hand bargain. That particularly applies actually in large format printers. They can be quite a steal if you can get a good one second-hand. And look, the other option is just start small. If you're printing on a smaller printer, that's definitely going to be your most economical way on doing it. But overall, I would say you almost need to. It's a bit like buying a car. You don't buy a car without budgeting for the ongoing running costs of it. And so if you're going to get into printing, recognize that there are some costs of ownership, budget for them. Think of it as an investment in your skills and development and quality of work, and just don't get too upset when you have to spend money on ink and paper. It's just part of growing and improving.
That's what I did. I got this Canon Pro 10. I got it for like $100 on eBay or something like that. It's like, and it prints 12 by 18s. They look really good on Canson or whatever. It's, I can't print bigger than that, but it's still, it's, if I want to see the work printed and have a physical print, it does a pretty good job, and I'm pretty happy with that. So
And look, I think the best way you can justify buying a printer is to have an exhibition or a print sale or something like that. And when you're selling your
Sure.
own prints in a volume, then printing soon becomes financially justifiable. If you're gonna go to a print house and get 20 44-inch prints run off, you don't need to do too many of those exhibitions. Two or three of those, and you're probably going to pay for the printer sort of thing, compared to getting the work done by a local print house sort of thing.
Yeah, totally makes sense. What was your story that you were gonna
Ah,
share?
so the first printer I bought was an Epson 24-inch. I can't think what. Well, not first, but the first big large format printer I bought was an Epson 24-inch, and I bought that from Team Digital here in Perth. And you go in the studio, in the shop, and they've got a range of printers set up, and you can see them test printing, and of course, in a large shop, these things don't look particularly big, and they don't sound particularly noisy either. But so I get a phone call a few weeks later from team saying, "Okay, your printer's going to be delivered today. Will you be in?" Yes, yes. So an hour or two later, this truck reverses into the driveway, and this palletized thing gets offloaded onto it, which requires two or three people to lift, to put the frame together and lift it, and then I get it into, and at this time the printer was actually in a living room in the house, and it was, of course, much bigger than I had visualized. And so I could see already where the conversation was going to go with the family on this one. And then when you fired this thing up, they are noisy. They are very large format printers are noisy. They've got vacuum pumps going and all sorts. And this thing was like a vacuum cleaner. So again, it was just it was quite invasive in the space it was in, and we just had to find another solution. And that's why I moved to. We had a spare bedroom, and that got emptied out, and everything moved into there. But yes, that was quite an awkward moment. It definitely didn't look that big or sound that noisy when I bought it. But yeah, they are when you get to big printers.
Yeah, there was a period of time where I was entertaining the idea of getting the 2100, I think, the 24-inch Canon printer, and I had like found the specs online, like the measurements of, height, width, depth, and all that, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And I'm like measuring it out in here. I'm like, I don't think that'll fit. I mean, it probably would, but I'd have to like get rid of a bunch of stuff. But yeah, it's amazing how much bigger they are than you actually realize.
hmm Yeah, it is. So and you definitely need a dedicated workspace for them.
Yeah,
And when you get involved with handling large rolls of print or large rolls of paper and large format images as well, having somewhere to lay them out and
right.
so on, and roll them back up, that all takes space as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing I like when I was contemplating getting my own printer of that size, one thing that I just couldn't get past in my own mind was, okay, yeah, it'd be cool. I would love to be able to print my own like 24 by 36s or whatever. But then I was like, but what do you do with them? Especially if it's not for an exhibition or it's not like, I don't have a terrible time selling my work, but it's like, gosh, man, now I'm gonna have like this huge pile of 24 by 36 prints that I have to figure out what am I gonna do with all these prints. So like, what do you do with your prints?
That is a very good question. So we have a local college here that runs a photography course, Metropolitan TAFE in Perth. They have an annual exhibition that the students run, but to fund the student exhibition, they ask local photographers to donate images to the exhibition, which they then have an auction, or to a different exhibit, and then they have an auction to raise funds for the students to put their own exhibition on. And so one of the things I've done for the last few years is by Canson and Guildford and so on, do archival boxes, sort of A3 plus archival boxes, and I will put a selection of 25 images off the say cutting room floor into one of those boxes, and that gets auctioned off. So that's one of the things I do with them.
I
But
love that idea.
a lot of it ends up unfortunately in the recycle bin.
uh, hey, that's the kind of paper that the recyclers want.
Hmm. Yes, yeah,
Oh man.
yes.
Yeah, no, that's the hard thing. It's like, it does feel a little wasteful. It's probably no more wasteful than half the other hobbies we have. So,
No, indeed. I did because I tend to sell my stuff limited edition, and I reprint the final versions when they're if there's an exhibition, they don't take the one off the wall. I'll reprint it because inevitably they get scuffed or something like that, and
right.
that's one of the most painful things is taking those to the tip and destroying them. But my daughter has taken to painting over the top of them and being creative with her art pens and creating her own piece of art. And she embellishes my images and then signs them at the bottom underneath my signature, and then they
I
go
love
to the
that.
tip.
See, they're probably worth more then, right?
Maybe, probably, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Hmm.
All right. Well, one more printing question. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've made over the years when it
Oh.
comes to printing?
Um, it's a long list. I wouldn't even know where to start on this. There's a lot of like I say, a lot of waste paper, unfortunately. And look, that's definitely a learning process, and it gets better, and you do a lot
Hmm.
less of it as time goes on. But
Hmm.
yeah, the first thing I would say is just tired eyes in general. If I've been working on an image for 3 or 4 hours, and then I print it out and then I'll look at it in the morning and I'll go, what was I thinking? The
Right.
magenta color cast all the way through that, or something like that. You just need to. So I'd say the first thing is before you do print, take a break from the image and come back to it the following day and make sure there's nothing glaring in there, because the amount of paper I've wasted just by having tired eyes, I think, is is
Mm.
is one thing. The other one I tend to find is the Photoshop interface for printing, used to be at least, and I don't use it anymore. I use Mirage because of this problem. But it is the most confusing thing ever. And trying to get the orientation of the paper right on the page and the margins and all those sorts of things, I'd inevitably end up, either printing in the wrong position or upside down or rotated 90 degrees or something like that. So initially, I had a lot of problems with that. I moved to a package called Mirage, which is a plugin. It's overkill for most applications. I would say it's quite an expensive product, but in terms of the lack of paper, I think I could justify it just based on the wasted images. But essentially, that makes sure that it's a much clearer interface. It's what you see is what you get layout on the page. I can lay out multiple images on rolls or sheets and see how they're going to look
Mm.
out, set up all the individual borders on them, all those sorts of things. And
Mm.
it'll tell me if the profile I've got selected isn't the same as the printer and vice versa. So that saved a lot of time and money there. End of roll. I basically, if you're printing on a 44 inch, I might get 3/4 of the way through the print, and then the printer goes, sorry, you're out of roll, and you've just put down a ton of ink on a sheet, and you've not quite got enough. Again, most printers these days are getting better at tracking paper usage, but again, just tracking that yourself and writing on a pencil on the outside of the box how much you printed off each time helps you avoid that problem. Blocked
Mm.
heads again, or something like that. Not on the new printer, but the old printer I had was 44 was second hand and getting a bit long. Getting a bit old, shall we say, towards the end of its life, and it got to a point where I was probably only 50% success rate of getting a large format print out without a defect coming through,
Mm.
and that for me was the time to get rid of the printer, because there's a fair cost involved in wasting paper that size. Damaged paper is another one. Especially with rolled paper, you can find, if you drop a roll of paper, that can quite easily go all the way. That an indent can go through, a long way into that. It's surprising how far they dents go into paper. So
Yeah, I ordered a box of 12 by 18s, Canson Infinity rag paper from B&H. Must have been last year. And, the package looked perfectly fine. Everything looked good. And I wasn't planning on using it because I was going to work on a project later. So I didn't open it till inspect it, which was my mistake. And so, like, maybe 2 months goes by, I opened the box and to start printing, and I noticed that somehow in shipping or whatever, one of the corners got hit. Every single page had like a corner that was crushed. I was like, oh, are you
yeah.
kidding?
Yeah, so yeah, I've had similar before. So I've had both. I've had stuff I bought in store and got it home to find that problem, and thankfully got a good relationship with, in this case, Team Digital. And you go back in and they know you, and they'll say, yeah, okay, fair enough. And I think, I've learned as well these days, if I'm buying a big box of paper, then I would probably open it in store and check it in store and go, yeah, that's all good, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I have also, dropped a roll of paper myself before I marked it up, and that's on me. That's my cost at that point. But it's very, very frustrating. The other one is just dust on paper. We try our best to keep all the paper clean, but inevitably, you get a piece of hair or even just a loose piece of coating on the, something comes off, a fleck of paper comes off from the mill. And so brushing the paper before putting it through your printer can help avoid that. But again, a 44-inch print, which especially if you're printing out some very flat images, they might just have one color or something like that. Is all about just simplicity. There's not a lot of texture in there. It's going to really stand out, and you're going to have to reprint the image. So
Yeah, or you have to get really good at using a Sharpie.
true. Yeah. Yes. Although again, when you're talking about and look, there are certain, if it's a black part of the image, you can get away with black, but color, you'll never color match what's going on.
I was just kidding.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I had one more topic and/or question for you, but I think it's a juicy one. But we'll save it for a bonus episode for Patreon after we're done. So
intriguing.
We'll tease people with that here. But tell us about the book project that you're working on right now.
Yeah, I was so myself and Matt Palmer, Mika Boynton, and Ricardo have been working on a project together since last year, and they've all, I guess, all over the last year been through the podcast, and it was great.
I was gonna say, powerhouse.
Great to hear them. Yeah, exactly. A huge talent pool there, myself accepted. But
oh, come on,
brilliant experience working with those guys. So we went to a part of the Flinders Ranges, and I guess as a group we spent a week there. We sort of spent it, I suppose, trying. The objective was really to document the landscape as we saw it individually on the day that we found it, with a view to sort of, because I think if you live in an area and you create a book when you live in the area of those images, you can go to 100 different sunsets at the same spot and pick the best one. Clearly when you're just visiting, you don't have that luxury. And so we wanted to try and create something that reflected a genuine representation of what we saw, what inspired us, as we found it in the conditions on the day, sort of thing. So the first half of that trip was spent with a lot of cloud and rain and fog, and then the second half was clear blue skies and color and all those sorts of things. So, but the project is really, what we're trying to do is collate that into a book, that hopefully we can get out to people later this year, but probably more likely early next year now.
Yeah, and just real quick, what was your why?
Well, I think the why was really about just was about four photographers just trying to document four photographers' individual interpretations of this diverse and ancient landscape. That was really the why. We're all landscape photographers. We all have very different styles.
Yeah.
Matt is a phenomenal landscape and nature photographer who tends to see those sort of have that environmental commentary in his images. Mika is one of the most incredible abstract landscape photographers. She also has just this beautiful understanding of the heritage and culture of these areas, and tends to be able to capture that and represent that in her images. And Rick is just his mind is something else, and his ability to conceive of composite images that tell this much bigger story and narrative. Again, it's just something very different. And then there's me. I don't know why the other three had me there, but it was a brilliant and fantastic experience.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, they were all very fun to talk to, and you guys are all different in your own ways, and it's been fantastic having each of you on the show to really just learn more about you and your photography and your approaches to it. So it's been really great. Well, and this is how I found out about you with my next question. So who would you recommend for the show? Who are some photographers that inspire you?
Yeah. Okay. So first off, I would recommend having a chat with Chris Dark. So as I said, Chris Dark is someone I spend a lot of time shooting with. We both see the world very differently, but we both have end up with very similar styles of image, I think. So, but he is very thoughtful and very much about the why and the why are we doing this? What's the backstory? He spends a lot of time when we're away writing and thinking about and documenting how he's feeling and all those aspects. He also does some incredible. I mentioned we did a series of taking images with Vaseline. He has taken that to the next level and sort of uses paintbrushes and things like that when he's applying it and so on. So I definitely encourage you to have a think about him in terms of some creative in-camera processes that he uses. The next person, and definitely not not understate, is Tony Hewitt. He is an incredible photographer. I don't think you've had him on the show. At least I couldn't find him listed on your history. But he he was the person who probably got me excited and motivated about aerial photography. I did a workshop with him. He is one of the most talented photographers I know. He has, we talked a bit earlier about longevity, and he has been producing quality work at the highest level for decades, and he would have some great stories. And he's also all about the why. Why are you doing this? What's the story? What's the narrative? Trying to capture that and reflect that in his art. So someone to talk to, definitely. Ewan Dunsmuir is someone I have not met personally, but I follow him on YouTube. He's not the most prolific poster. I think he's had some absences for a few years. He's based in New Zealand, but he's originally from, I think, the Orkney Islands, and he has this incredibly beautiful way of explaining things. He's very much about capturing in camera. He's about being in the landscape and enjoying it, and about getting off the beaten track and all that sort of thing. So I think he would very much resonate with your listeners. John Woodhouse is a another WA photographer, originally from South Africa. He is he's not a pure landscape photographer. He is what I would call someone who has an extreme breadth and depth to their work. He does fine art nudes. He does a lot of nature photography, a lot of landscape photography, a lot of abstract photography. But the quality of that work, and just his his passion for the subject would make him a really good person to talk to. And then last but not least, Tanya Malkin, who is another Australian landscape aerial photographer. I would say she's more than that. She's my limited experience of her. She is probably what you call an artist as much as anything. Yeah, she's a brilliant painter. She has produces some amazing quality work, and I think it would be interesting to see to hear inside and hear what her thoughts are.
I love it. Well, Chris, this has been fantastic, and I just love doing these podcasts because every single week I learn something new, and I get energized about something else. So thank you for your contribution.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you to Chris for the wonderful chat. If you want to hear Chris and I debate about just how far enough is enough when editing aerial photographs, you can check out that bonus episode over on Patreon. Chris was a fantastic guest, and I think you'll love the chat. I would love to hear from you and get your feedback on the episode. The best way to join in on that conversation is to join us for free on Patreon. Each week, I will be creating a thread for the episode on Patreon for listeners to engage in. To get started, join us over on patreon.com/fstopandlisten or visit the link in the show notes. I look forward to engaging with you all over there. Lastly, I want to announce that we will be launching an executive producer system for our Patreon supporters. The idea is quite simple. For every $500 in lifetime support of the show that you contribute, you will get an executive producer credit, which you can proudly use to put your name on a past episode. Your stamp of approval, if you will. We will be keeping track of these and making them public so that people can see which episodes have the highest value to our listeners. If you're already a Patreon supporter and would like to use a credit, please reach out to me and we can get started. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.